Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, my guest is Jaeson Jones, internationally renowned border intelligence expert and retired Texas DPS captain. Mr. Jones, how are you?
Buddy, I'm good, Brad. It's good to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you coming on. The border is such a huge story, especially now with the election going on. I'm in Texas. I think you're in Texas as well. There's a Texas behind you, so you must be. So you know that it's always in the news here, and it seems like the news is spreading. Let's say. So I'm happy to have you on. It's a real honor. So briefly, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. What is it? You're internationally renowned border intelligence expert. How did you get that?
Yeah, I'm a retired captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division, and I was so frustrated by. And I managed also during that time the State Fusion Center, the Texas Rangers Cross Border Operations Center. And when I retired, I was so frustrated that what was happening in Mexico with migrants, Mexican citizens, and with our own citizens, that what was happening wasn't getting out. I went public after retiring in July of 2016, and I'm the guy that started the whole initiative to designate the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations in this country. So, if you had ever told me, though, that 8 years later, just about, we'd still be here and that, our country would be suffering with 112,000 overdose deaths, I have to tell you, I wouldn't believe it. But it's really an indicator to you, Brad, how broken our federal government has really become in the country.
So you were frustrated by the fact that the news wasn't getting out, or maybe I don't know, in your view, accurate news, right? Wasn't getting out. Why wasn't it getting out? Out of curiosity, what was the?
Well, I've learned a lot since that time. First, one thing I've learned is that we don't have the investigative journalists that we used to have. I work with some of the finest journalists in the country. Currently, I'm Newsmax's national border correspondent. Never planned on that either.
Yeah.
But what was happening in Mexico was this evolution of these cartels from organized crime into an insurgency, into terrorism, and then where we see them today as a parallel government. And we were having anywhere from 10 to 12-hour gun battles with military grade weapons on our border, and none of this was getting out. And so while U.S. intelligence agencies and the national media were looking to the Middle East because of the Middle East terrorist fight that this country was in, the Las Zetas cartel was completely overtaking Mexico and started an evolution that I just described to you here just a while ago that has now really created, one of the, I think any reasonable person could articulate, the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11, because there's so many people that have died in Mexico from these cartels, for over 440,000 since 2007. And then look at the deaths in our own country from, according to the CDC, just from fentanyl, never mind all the other drugs and all the other things happening. So my whole goal and initiative was to create the authorities that we needed beyond the law enforcement mission to truly fix the problem. And as somebody that had built programs to go after these cartels, that's what I've been trying to really accomplish. So today, my whole vision is this: we illuminate it so that we can eliminate it. Keep it very simple. I know the cartel's operations very well. I know how they operate. And so I leverage my sources within the cartels to help me get information, to understand what the major tripwires are before they impact our country, and then try to illuminate that by getting it out to journalists and to Newsmax nationwide.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about the cartels, and I think we'll get to that maybe a little bit later. But I want to stick to one thing that you mentioned just there, that it's sort of a parallel government, um, and I think that people kind of know what that means, but
Yeah.
not maybe not to like the detail that they need to. I know that I certainly don't know what are they. Do they what do they do? How are they a parallel government?
Well, let's first talk about what is a cartel,
Sure.
right? Because most people don't even say that. Cartel means agreement, but it's been bastardized over the years. So, and really, basically, all it is now is an agreement between one criminal organization and another one to unite. And as you get bigger and bigger, and multiple organizations start to work under the same umbrella, that's where you see the biggest. And those who are able to work well together and truly create that synergy at multiple levels become the biggest. And a great example of that would be the Sinaloa cartel, who's operating in 54 countries around the world, or Cartel Jalisco New Generation, really considered today as the most hyper violent. They're in 48 nations. So, the perception or belief that this is a US Mexico problem changed a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've heard stories, and of course you would know better. I've heard stories that in some maybe smaller, I don't know, maybe bigger too, Mexican cities, the cartels are, I don't know, they offer services for the people there that they're not, I don't know, maybe some people kind of, they're not totally unwelcome, maybe, so long as they're not violent. I don't really know. Like, I read these stories and I'm like, I don't know what to believe. I can't imagine people being happy about being run by, a violent gang. But if the Mexican government isn't providing the services promised and the cartel does, I could kind of see it maybe. Is that totally
Well,
crazy?
let's talk about kind of where they are today and how they became that, and then you'll understand that they're not a gang. And we can discuss those differences because it's really a good question. It's an important distinction for everyone because what we try to do here in the United States is relate to what's happening in Mexico to our own, you know, what's happening around us, and all we can really link it to is gangs. Well, no, these cartels are at a totally different level. So first, you have to understand you were talking about people that are operating globally. Second, you're talking about people who go through basic, intermediate, and advanced training by former special forces and former terrorist organizations like the FARC. The FARC was a designated foreign terrorist organization down in Colombia for many, many years, going back to the late 80s, early 90s. That's the first thing you need to understand. Second, is that this evolution that they've gone through, they truly were organized crime like US mafia was, prior to '06. But what happened was a major tripwire. And that's where the Calderon administration began leveraging their military to come in and go after them. Well, at the time when that was happening, again, US media, and where was our focus in '06? It was on Middle East terrorist organizations. So the eye was off of what was happening south of us and at our border. And this is where the Calderon administration began leveraging military to go after them. And what did we say here in the West? And in the United States, we said, oh, no, you don't use your military domestically because that's what we know. But what we had not realized in Mexico is that local, state, and federal had been corrupted at the highest levels. And I can give you many analogies of that. But then what we saw was another adjustment because as they went from organized crime, they went directly into terror. I mean, to in the insurgency. This is when they were truly fighting back against Sedena, against Samar. Sedena is the Mexican military down there, basically the big army.
Yeah.
Samar would be like our U.S. Marines. And I mean, we were having these massive gun battles with first, second generation armored vehicles. We were having gun battles with 50 caliber belt fed machine guns, light anti tank weapons, RPGs, and hand grenades. And I'm screaming, hey, we've got problems down here. We got problems. Yeah, Jason, we hear you, but we're all focused over here right now.
Yeah.
And then from there, we had the issue with terrorism. This is when you saw in 2010 the San Fernando incident where you had 72 migrants executed by the Zetas, the 300 men, women, and children of Allende who were killed, chopped into pieces, and then guisoed because cartels have a saying you can't count a body that doesn't exist. So they burned them into ash. And I could go on. The Monterey incident, there have been many of them. And then what did we finally see? This adjustment from terrorism into a parallel government. We'll talk about that because you asked about that. That really first indicator of that was in 2015 during Operation Jalisco, as the Mexican military leveraged some of their most elite special forces to go after El Mencho, who was the head of the Cartel Jalisco New Generation in the state of Jalisco. And they shot his helicopter out of the sky as they were coming in for air to ground operations and then stopped their ground units. And this operation impacted 42 different municipalities throughout the state of Jalisco. That's how big this operation was. And they held them from the Mexican government. That was the first indicator. There are major, major problems in Mexico as the government is now not strong enough to truly take them on.
Yeah.
So, what was the validator that they're now in a parallel government? Well, look at what happened with Ovidio Guzman. The first time we attempted to apprehend him in 2019, he was taken into custody by some of the most elite special forces in Mexico down in Culiacan. And then he was forced to be released by the president of Mexico. And the world witnessed that. And so he was released back to, this was the son of one of the many sons. They have a cell called Los Chapitos who took over from Chapo Guzman. Those are his sons, run by Ivan. And as a video was released back to them, it indicated to the world that, yes, in fact, they had seeded a true parallel government. And for anyone watching right now, just CNN did some great reporting on this. If you go back and you look at the last national election in Mexico, there were 132 politicians and staffers killed. So when you talk about What's their ideology? Are they truly a parallel government? Think of this. Imagine if we had a national election in our country and we lost 132 politicians and staffers from campaigns. Think of that. That's where Mexico is, but don't take my word for it. Go to CNN, type in politicians killed in during the last national election, and you will see it. They did some great reporting on that. One of the only news agencies that did it.
Yeah, I feel like if there was 132 politicians or staffers or whatever killed in an American election, I feel like that would be a huge deal, obviously, for obvious reasons. So I mean, since we're on the cartels, and I want to get to the border after this, and I mean, it's all related, of course. But what is their involvement at the border? I mean, they have the. I hear that they're trafficking. I believe all of this is true. They're trafficking drugs. They're trafficking people, sex trafficking, human trafficking, smuggling of all sorts, and everything like that. Um, are they? And you say that they're not isolated into Mexico. Obviously, I assume that they're in the United States as well. Are they competing for this? I don't know, for access to the border or different businesses that cross the border, different types of smuggling. Are they, how violent are they when they interact with border patrol or ICE or the Texas DPS, or what is what's going on with the cartels and the border specifically?
So if you look at what we call the frontera, which is all the plazas, Mexico, their townships, they call them plazas. In the United States, we call them municipalities. If you look at all of them, from Matamoros across from Brownsville, all the way down our borderline, you will see that from the cartel's perspective, when we debrief them, that is the front line. That is the war. That is where the major war zone is. And it will always be that way because for those who control those plazas, control both legitimate and illegitimate goods that move. So this is why they battle for control of the plazas. What you still hear from most of the national media is a 1980s model that they battle for control of smuggling and trafficking routes. That's absolutely and fundamentally false. They did that in the 80s. In 2024, they battle for control of territory. Their ideology is very simple. They want control of everything. And that's what they're truly doing in Mexico. So what happens is they utilize, you hear this term, and I'd love to listen to the national media talk about this, about the cartels have operational control of the Southwest border. You hear that all the time. Nobody ever tells you what the hell that means or how they do it because these pundits have no idea. They've never debriefed one. So here's how it really works. They leverage what is called the Halcon network. Halcon is falcon or lookouts or scouts. They check on and off just like law enforcement. I've seen them in South Texas operating on two-way handheld encrypted radios as far as 30 miles in the state of Texas. I've seen them in Arizona, 70 miles, and they communicate on two-way encrypted radios that hit repeaters and then shoot through simulcasting back to Mexico to what is called Central. And every day, 24/7, 365, especially when there's bad weather, because they know cops don't want to work in the bad weather, they control their area. So just now, every cartel operates a little differently, but I'll go to South Texas because I know it very well. I know how Cartel de Golfo, known as CDG, operates very, very well, who controls most of the border with Texas. First off, every bend in the river where they control territory is considered a gate. And so they will have halcones on the US side and they will have halcones on the Mexico side. And they'll check on and off, just like I talked about. And they watch everything all the time. They don't shut down. And when the gate is open, meaning that there's no law enforcement, goods, illicit goods, are able to move between the ports of entry as they want to move them. So what is that? If you're moving south, it's money usually, and it's guns, or people that you've kidnapped that you want to kill in Mexico. Or if you want to move it north, well, it's dope usually, or it's bodies. Okay. And that's the way the game works. And it is very dynamic. It is real. Now, the question you should be asking right now is, why in the hell is nobody telling me this?
Yeah.
Why am I on a podcast with a guy who's retired who's telling me? Where is the DEA? Where is the FBI? Where is DHS? Where is the Homeland Security Enterprise to tell you this? I'll tell you what, most people in Washington have no idea. And the media, whose job it is to understand it, well, what I've really learned about them as somebody who's now both in the national media and worked at other media, they really don't have the resources and the funding to go down and understand the depth of what's taken place. So this is how it really works along your border, and why a lot of what is taking place is not getting out. So what happens mostly? They send a reporter to the border, and what happens? They're down there for about 3 to 5 days. And that reporter doesn't know where to go because the cartel doesn't walk around with a born to lose tattoo stamped on their forehead. So they send massive groups to certain areas. They do that by design. That way, when the reporter comes down, he can stick a microphone in their face and look at all the bodies and it looks scary. That's the easy stuff. From that, that's when you then have everything by design. Send big groups, then to the side, send what we call runners. Those are people for whatever reason not allowed to stay in the U.S. if they get apprehended. Once they make it through, that's the indicator that you're good to go. The gate is open because now all resources of law enforcement taken up with that big group, and then from there you can move any commodity that you want to move. This is how it works. It is very dynamic. When you talk about the strength and scope of these people, they are no joke. But you should ask yourself one thing: why is it that you, as the American people, are not being told? And you got to hear all this from a retired guy, because this is where our system truly is.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a good question about why this is not more commonly reported. It's hard to believe that the I don't know, the upper echelon, the higher levels at the federal government don't know about this sort of stuff. Um, that doesn't just because it's hard to believe doesn't mean it's not true. But we're told that those are the people that know. They're there for a reason, so they've got to know, right? But apparently that's not the case. So
I have briefed. It's really funny. I prior to getting out of law enforcement, I've been to the agency. I work closely with them. I work closely with DIA. I work closely with me. It's what all this shit is behind you here,
yeah,
rescuing people in Mexico. And I will tell you that what was really interesting back in the day, I briefed General Flynn when he was over the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was a 3-star at the time. And, what I found is that they see what the problem is in classified reporting. They know, like you said, but they can't tell you because they're reading it in classified reports, right?
yeah,
What they see it is in the intelligence reporting. Where they don't see it is in the data, because of the FBI's failed uniform crime reporting system. And today they utilize national incident based reporting system. But transnational crime isn't quantified by data. So they see it in the intel. And so what I learned is that they weren't lying, and nor were we. We in the South were screaming, we've got problems. We've got problems, as we've been saying for 20 years. And in the North, when I would go up there, this was prior to my retirement, they would say, Jason, we hear you. We see the problem in the intelligence reporting, but we don't see it in the data. Now, they weren't lying and we weren't lying. The system that collects transnational crime data did not work. The
yeah,
Uniform Crime Report system only collected on 8 index crimes. So now fast forward to where we are today, and all Americans can see how broken our border is with 10 million people crossing in the last 3 years, if you include the gotaways as well. So
yeah.
the cartels have made a lot of money off this, and a lot of Americans and a lot of people have lost their lives as a result of it.
Yeah, I want to talk about the human toll of the border, certainly. But before we get there, while we're still talking about the cartels, or just to sort of wrap up that conversation, are they? You talked about you've seen them 30 miles inside the Texas border, 70 miles inside the Arizona border. I mean, are they also, and how they're international, 48, 50 countries?
Um,
Certainly one of those is the United States. Are they embedded in cities? I don't know whether it be, I'm in Austin. I don't know. Maybe I've walked by a cartel member and I don't know. I don't know how.
more than you can imagine. I'll promise you, they're everywhere. Do you have a drug problem in Austin, Texas?
Oh, well, certainly. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I don't
So
have a
wherever
drug
you,
problem in Austin, Texas, but
well,
Austin has a
no,
drug problem.
yeah, yeah. Well, you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
wherever, it's a great question, because wherever you have that drug linkage, and depending upon the scope of it, really gives you an example of the scope of the problem that you have there and how it's directly linked to the border. Give you a great example. I embedded with a federal law enforcement agency in Kensington last year. Kensington is ground zero for the East Coast for the largest open air fentanyl market. I was an undercover narcotics agent for many, many years. I've never seen what I've seen in Kensington. I've been in a lot of heroin dens during my career,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna tell you, truly, truly devastation to a community and to people. So fentanyl is a game changer. Now, why do I bring this up? Because guess whose dope that all is? The Sinaloa cartels. And wherever they operate along our border region is how they bring it across. So they control the Juarez Plaza. And what I learned is that they're sending in fentanyl from the Juarez area, crosses into El Paso. A lot of them are body carrying on aircraft and then bringing it right in just outside of Kensington. It's given over in kilos over to Honduran street gangs. who then break it up into these little bitty $10 baggies that are then sold to people in the street corners. And then the street corner dealers literally fight for a corner of a street and then they sell it to the addicts. That's how it works.
Gosh.
So every major city has that tentacle, is what I'm trying to get at. And I was
Yeah.
trying to be very granular to explain to you the impact. So, if you live in Kensington or you live in Pennsylvania and you say, oh, yeah, Jason, we've always had that heroin problem over there. Well, no, you didn't. Heroin problem came from the Colombians in Kensington. That had always been there since the 70s. In 2001, and this is the story that's not told, the Sinaloans moved in under Chapo Guzman and they took over the heroin market. Do you know how they did it? Gave it away for free and took that area over because they were selling dope cheaper than the Colombians could. Once they controlled the distribution, then when they introduced fentanyl, you didn't have a fentanyl crisis in this country. So how they do it in 2015, as we first started seeing fentanyl across the border, they moved it up there, and as they sold you heroin, they gave you fentanyl for free. Same thing they did when they took over the meth market in the United States. So, you hear this adage all the time, and I shake my head because I've been working this a very long time. You hear that, look, it's a supply and demand issue. If you rotten Americans just didn't have a drug problem, this wouldn't be here. And that makes sense, right? All of us say, okay, right, got to supply, supply and demand. We all learned it in school, right? Okay,
Sure.
it makes sense. But never forget, someone's got to create the demand.
Yeah. Yeah, fentanyl didn't it's not like it just grows on trees and people are out there picking it.
That's
They
right.
have to.
That's right. You gotta have chemists. You gotta have a lab. You got
Yeah.
to have MPP and 4-AMP imported in chemical precursors in order to mix it to make it, along with some other stuff I won't mention. So, this is the story of how Americans have been lied to and have gotten us into a position where we have lost 112,000 people from May of 22 to May of 23. We had never been here as a nation. I'm an older guy. I'm 51 years old. And I can remember in the 80s when the crack epidemic, we were at 10,000 a year from the crack epidemic
Yeah.
at the worst year. So when I tell you we're in a bad place right now as a nation, and I'm as somebody that knows these cartels very well, if you think this is where it ends, get ready. This is nothing. We'll have 300,000 dead, and the cartels will not stop for a minute. They do not care. I want to be very clear on that. They don't care if they kill all Americans, because to them, we're one economy. People ask me all the time, Jason, why would they kill their own addicts? Don't they need the money? No, they don't. Again, we're one economy. They're operating in Europe, they're operating in Australia, they're operating in Russia. I mean, but the problem here again, and I'll go back and I'll say it again and again. Why has the Homeland Security Enterprise not briefed this to the United States? And I could go on. I mean, you want validation as to how strong they've become? Look at what just happened in Ecuador.
What happened?
Great example. You didn't see what happened in Ecuador where the
I don't think
gangs took
so.
over and literally took over the country? It happened about 3-4 weeks ago. You didn't see this. It was incredible.
I
The
don't know how
two
I missed that.
gangs, the two gangs that were involved in taking over were directly linked to Cartel Jalisco New Generation, known as Los Lobos, the Wolves.
Okay.
And then the other gang that worked with the Sinaloa cartel, who's their competitor, the Chinoras, they were working with the Sinaloans. You ought to Google that and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just a great example of how powerful these organizations have truly become.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I that one flew under my radar somehow. But yes, I mean, I'm looking. I just googled it sort of while you were talking, and that is indeed a wild story. I feel silly for not knowing that. So
Well, you shouldn't look. And it's a great point. Most Americans are not tracking it either, because what happens in Mexico and Central and South America, it can't be reported to the degree and breadth and scope. Because why? Because they will kill the journalists down there. Look at the amount of journalists being killed and executed in Mexico.
yeah,
There's a reason why what's happening down there as well. It's not getting out to the degree of what's happening.
yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time. And I mean, I could feel like I could talk to you about the cartels and what they're doing and the logistics of it all and the human their lack of, I don't know, sounds silly to say, lack of empathy towards other human life, and all of that obviously would be fascinating. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about the border specifically and the human toll there. Like you mentioned, if you include the gotaways, something around like 10 million illegal immigrants in the past 3 years.
Yeah,
I think 300,000 just this past December 2023 alone. Um, what percentage of those people, you know, are involved in some, I mean, other than the act of crossing the border illegally, are involved in some nefarious scheme, whether it be
it's a great question.
trafficking
Yeah,
or
it's a good.
trafficking?
Yeah, don't let anyone lie to you. No one really knows.
Okay.
They can't know because what's crossing at the border is not a US Mexico problem. It's not a US Mexico Central or South America problem. The world is truly coming now. So the reason I tell you that there's no way to truly know is because what database do you check in Somalia to determine what their past and their background is? What database do you check for Uzbekistanis? What database do you check for most of the West African countries that are coming here? The answer is there isn't one.
Yeah.
And this is the story that's not told to the American people. So, you're under the impression, based on what you're being told from our federal government right now, that they're conducting background investigations. That is fundamentally false. It's just fundamentally false. So the real answer, and where the real concern comes, and you'll hear mostly from people about national security. Well, we're far beyond the national security threat. The national security threat is all about one thing: trying to stop the problem before it hits here. Well, we opened the border up, and we had people from 171 different countries in just 2023 alone. And so when we did that, now we're in the realm of pure public safety, trying to stop what's going to impact the American people through sexual assaults, murders, etc. And the long list goes on: burglaries, robberies, thefts. That's the realm where we are right now in 2024.
Can you go into more detail about those crimes and how common they are? With
No, yeah, it's a great question. Every day, every day in your country, there are illegals committing crimes. And, look, just like there are Americans, right? I
Mhm.
mean, people are committing crimes. But the problem is that most Americans are not aware that in certain states, you can't even ask them if they're illegal.
Yeah.
So when you hear this term, and I love to listen to the lies that are told, I mean, it's fascinating to me that illegals commit less crimes than Americans. Well, really, where do you get that data from? Where's that data set coming from? Because if you're living in New York, you can't make that request of them. That information is not collected. If you live in New Jersey, that information is not collected. And you could go through a long list of states across the nation where you can't collect that data. So the real answer, and look, it's a good question because all of us want to know, is we don't know. And that's where I think things are going to have to change in the future because if Americans can be arrested, their mugshot taken, and that information be released publicly, then we need to know the impact from illegal immigration. And I say that with the emphasis on then how local communities, state communities, and national law enforcement at all levels can then coordinate programs to try to minimize those impacts. Because if you live on the East Coast, you may feel the impact through drugs, through burglaries. In the West Coast, it may be in a different model, like human smuggling, human trafficking. And so you need to be able to adjust your programs to best focus on the crimes being committed to bring them down in all communities.
Sure. So, I mean, there's obviously human trafficking, sex trafficking, all that stuff. There's, I guess, coyotes. They'll pay them to help you cross the border, right? Um, how reliable is that a coyote? I mean, people get lost, right, as they cross the border? It's sort of no man's land in a way. I've been down to the Texas border, and I mean, unless you know where you are, it's all looks the same. It's not. I think I'd have a hard time navigating down there by myself. Do people get? I mean, how often people cross and then they just end up, not making it the whole way?
Well, when you say not making it the whole way, what
Well, let's say
exactly do you
I
mean by that?
crossed the border. I paid a coyote. I don't know what the going rate is. 10 grand to
Mhm.
get me across the border. He gets me across the border, and he says, "Good luck, amigo. Off you go." And I'm like, "Okay, but I just go this way," and I just start walking. I don't know. It seems like that's a
Well,
a
yeah,
felony for anybody.
it's so you have multiple tiers now, and so this is an important part that needs to be discussed. You have what we call the give ups. Those are those big long lines that every news agency is showing everybody, and they cross. They pay the smugglers their piso or their tax to cross. They get allowed to cross. They're told you cross right here at this time, and then they all move in a group and they're crossed.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the give ups. They go straight to Border Patrol. Border Patrol processes them, gives them a notice to appear, and then they're put on buses, planes, everything, and they're sent throughout the country wherever they want to go. That's one methodology, right?
Wherever they wanna go?
That's right, wherever they want to go. Your government's paying for it.
Yeah.
Then you have the other groups, which are the runners. Now, those are the ones who I was talking about earlier that for whatever reason they're not allowed to stay here. So now they're paying a different set of fees to be able to skirt law enforcement. So the cartels will tell them when they can go and where they go. Then they're considered the runners. Those are the ones who are crossing between the ports, but not the give ups. So many of them will pay. If you're a Mexican citizen, it's usually around $2,500 in South Texas, just across the river. If you're Central American, it's 3,000. If you are Russian or Chinese, I'm sorry, if you're Chinese, it's 5,000, and if you're Russian or Middle Eastern, it's 9 grand. Now that's just across the river. Now it's like you just asked me, and the reason I said, well, where? How far north? Because the more you ask of them, the more they're going to charge you.
Yeah.
In the old days, they didn't give a shit. They crossed you at the southern border and they charge you about $100. They didn't care where you came from. But what they learned under this administration, because just as law enforcement was dealing with this overwhelming number of people, so were the cartels. So what did they do? They started putting wristbands on men, women, and children. And I broke this story in February of 2021. I get a call from a Border Patrol agent. He says, Jason, you got to get down here right now. We have thousands of people in the last few days that are crossing wearing these things. And they're so organized that they began coming up with these wristbands. Can you see this? Tell me when it's in focus there, because my eyes are
Focus,
getting.
yeah. In
Is that focused?
Mega? Yeah, pretty focused.
Okay. There you go. All right. Can you see this little number here? Tell me when it's
Uh,
focused.
yeah,
Too close.
2411.
Okay. That is assigned to a migrant. But
Okay.
when they originally started this, these were some of the first ones that we were seeing, along with some others. Now, each color represents a different alien smuggling organization, all working for Cartel de Golfo, one cartel.
Yeah.
And it was one wristband color where they were red, kind of like these. And I was stunned. Within 6 weeks, they had moved 36 miles up and down the river, every other group, because they had become so emboldened they didn't care, because they realized that people were the gift that keep giving. So what they did is, as you came into stash houses, they got all of your PII data, your personal identifying information. And they would say, okay, where are you coming from? I'm coming from here. Okay, what's your mom's name, your dad's name? What's your home address? It's this address. Okay, where are you going in the US? I'm going here. I'm going there. Who are you going to be with? I'm going to go here. Then they grab their cell phone and they call mom and dad to validate on the country of origin where they came from, to validate it.
Yeah.
Then they did everything they could to validate where they're going. And when they got what they agreed upon, the payment,
Yeah.
they got one of these wristbands. Now, this is what we call debt bondage. This is not smuggling. This is the trafficking of people in what we call the final form of trafficking. Because I think when most Americans hear about trafficking, you think of commercial sex. But what they forget is that you also have forced labor, and then what we are now talking about, debt bondage. And then they crossed in large numbers with these wristbands. And as soon as they hit the US soil, I got it on countless videos. They rip them off. They would just be all over the ground by the thousands. And I held these up before Congress, just so you know, and I said, you are witnessing America's new slave trade, at the Homeland Security Committee just a few months ago. Look, tried to warn what was coming. And what the nation needs to understand is you're going to be dealing with a tidal wave of human trafficking, because now these people crossed. Our nation, our country, sent them throughout the nation.
Yeah.
And then they were indebted to a criminal organization who really should be a terrorist organization in a foreign country of Mexico for years, if not decades to come. This is where we really are. And so you got to ask yourself, Congress is finally getting onto these. They've been showing them now. I don't know if you realize that or not. They're finally getting these out. It's taken me years. I briefed Senator Cruz. I briefed Chip Roy, Congressman, and many, many others. Here's one. Whenever you see one like this, can you tell here and see how it's got this?
Yeah.
It's still connected. Do you know why? Because it was on a child.
Yeah.
I've seen these on a 10-day-old child.
Jeez.
And what they'll do is they'll take them, and their wrist is the size of my finger, and they'll just wrap them around them.
Yeah.
But they have to pay, because that child is a commodity. I know that's hard to understand. It is hard for your audience to wrap their mind around, but a child is a commodity to the cartels. And that's exactly where we are now. So when I tell you that we are witnessing America's new slave trade, The damn guys are so emboldened, they're even willing to put these on men, women, and children. I've gotten this out so many times on national news, I can't even tell you.
Yeah. So, just final question. I know it's probably more probably don't have enough time to answer, to be honest, because I'm sure you could spend hours talking about it. But as briefly as you can, the Texas legislature meets every couple of years, and the show focuses on Texas and what things going on in Texas. What is there anything that the Texas legislature could do, that Governor Abbott could do next session?
Well, what they've done, let me tell you where we are now. That's very important because it's a game changer. No other state has ever done what we've done. Last year, Governor Abbott declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, which gives him constitutional powers to repel an invasion. It's unprecedented. It's never happened in the history of our country that any sitting governor has declared that. Now, what the governor never did was actually deport people. So
Yeah,
that gave him the authority. So what has happened now is the Texas legislature was so frustrated that these people were flowing into our country or into our state over the last 3 years in large numbers. They just passed one of the most stringent laws ever. And that is that for any state, and that is that if you come into the state of Texas from a foreign country, you can be arrested by a state or a local law enforcement officer, sent before a judge, and deported.
yeah,
Here's the problem, though. This has immediately been met by the federal government and the Department of Justice with a lawsuit. This is going to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And to all of your viewers, this is the thing to watch in 2024. And the reason for that is because what Governor Abbott has done that is unprecedented is that he has given himself standing. And what I mean by that is that Arizona tried to do this 10 years ago and they weren't able to get it passed because they didn't have the standing. He has declared the invasion.
yeah.
So he is basically the supreme commander of everything for Texas under the supreme authority of the Constitution. Now, what will be interesting is to see how the U.S. Supreme Court rules this,
Yeah.
because this will set the stage for decades to come for other states to also be able to follow that and then to be able to conduct their own deportations.
Interesting. Um, just real briefly, I forgot to ask: and I think the answer is, and that's a great answer. I appreciate you saying that. But before you go, I need to ask this question. It seems like there's a big push to say that they're all asylum seekers, and that's what they are. They're asylum seekers, and we hear the name change over and over and over. And it seems like that's the latest. And I'm sure there are some asylum seekers. I don't know. But of the, I don't know, let's say 300,000 that crossed last month, how many are seeking asylum, do you think?
Don't know.
True,
Most of
true
them
asylum
don't.
seekers.
You have to understand, why would they claim asylum? It's
Right.
because that's the avenue that this administration has allowed them to be able to claim in order to stay here legally. So it's all a racket. Everyone needs to understand that. So what I mean by that is depending upon the country you come from determines what you claim.
Yeah.
And asylum is for many of them because we're having people come from countries so far away. That's the way you get around our current laws. Just so everyone's aware, the law is very clear on claiming asylum. You have to be able to make certain articulations in there. You're fleeing credible fear because of from a foreign government. You could be killed. I mean, there's all kinds of things. We have never seen a government an administration in our government allow mass asylums, because one of the criteria in the law that's very clear is it is regulated by a case by case basis.
Yeah.
Many administrations may have let 5, 10, 30 people in. We've never seen anything like this.
Yeah. It seems like a whole different ballgame. Well, Jason Jones, I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you want to plug your social media and website and stuff like that?
Yeah, look, go to jasonjones.com. That's JAESON, jasonjones.com, or any of the social media sites. You'll see us there. Everything we're about, though, is not this immigration layer. I am about getting the terrorism designation to try to stop what is coming when it comes to what's going to impact Americans and truly save lives. So thanks for having me today. It's great to be with you.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you so much for your work.